When I pulled off the highway that summer morning, I thought I'd taken the wrong exit. The dirt road I grew up on was gone, replaced by smooth black asphalt mailbox rows and a massive stone sign that read, "Welcome to Maple Creek HOA." Rows of identical houses stretched across the valley where my father's barn once stood. Kids played on driveways poured right over the roots of the oak trees we planted together. And then she appeared, red blazer clipboard in hand, shouting at landscapers like she owned the place. Karen Blackwood, HOA president. When I walked toward my old property line, 2 security guards blocked me. "Sir, this is private HOA property." I held up the yellow deed my father signed in 1974. "Really?" I said. "Because according to this, it's mine." She smirked. "That land hasn't belonged to you for years." That's when I realized she hadn't just built a neighborhood. She'd built it on my land. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and don't forget to subscribe for more insane HOA stories like this. I was born on that land. 48 acres of wind, wood, and soil that carried my family's name since the 1952. My father, Raymond Hayes, used to say, "Land doesn't just belong to you, son. You belong to it." When he passed, that ranch became more than property. It was a promise I hadn't kept. After he died, I left for a job overseas, engineering contracts that kept me moving from base to base. What was supposed to be a 2-year assignment stretched into 8. I paid the taxes, renewed the deed every cycle, and trusted the county's online system to do the rest. But systems fail, and sometimes so do people. For years, my mailbox sat empty, the address untouched. The old cabin stood silent, collecting dust, guarded by the same oak trees that shaded my childhood. I thought it would wait for me. I had no idea that while I was flying halfway across the world, a woman named Karen Blackwood was laying the foundation for her little empire right on top of my inheritance. It started, I later found out, with one zoning meeting. Karen, who had moved into a nearby subdivision, had clawed her way into becoming HOA president within months. She was sharp, ambitious, and had a talent for twisting the words community improvement into personal conquest. Her dream was to turn the sleepy edges of Ironwood County into what she called the Beverly Hills of the Midwest. The first time my land came up for discussion, it wasn't even about development. It was about a drainage issue. A small creek ran along my property line, feeding into the HOA's new retention pond. Karen claimed it caused flooding concerns and proposed annexing the adjacent unused land, which was mine, to stabilize the area. The motion passed easily. Nobody checked who owned what. 6 months later, bulldozers rolled in. They cleared the fence lines my father built, tore down the barn that still smelled of cedar, and poured concrete where the soil was still warm from spring rain. The entire process was backed by a developer named Harrington Properties, who saw an opportunity: 48 acres of unclaimed land just sitting idle with no recent tax activity visible in the county's glitchy database. See, Ironwood County had just switched to a digital record-keeping system. The clerk who handled my father's estate had retired, and during the transfer, my parcel ID was mistyped. The system couldn't link it to my mailing address. To the county's eyes, my land simply vanished off the map, but still very real in the dirt. Karen pounced. She filed for a community annexation request, citing abandoned rural plots. The HOA paid $1 in symbolic transfer fees and declared it Maple Creek Phase 2. Within a year, foundations were being poured, roads carved through what used to be my grazing fields. When I got an email from an old neighbor, it didn't even sound real. "Dante, you need to come home. They're building houses where your barn used to be." I thought it was a joke, until he sent pictures. 88 identical houses. Beige, soulless boxes stacked side by side like cloned organisms. The caption under one photo said it all: "Welcome to the new Maple Creek." I remember sitting in my hotel room in Dubai, staring at those photos with my coffee going cold. The rage came slowly, like a furnace heating up from inside my chest. It wasn't about money, it was about legacy. My father's name had been erased, replaced by some shiny HOA logo designed in Microsoft Word. I flew home 3 weeks later. When my taxi turned onto the new paved street, I didn't recognize a thing. The mailbox that once had Hayes Ranch carved into it was gone, replaced by a glossy black HOA-approved post with gold numbers, Lot 42. A child was riding a bike over the spot where my father's workshop once stood. A dog barked in the distance. For a moment, I felt like a ghost haunting my own home. The next day, I went to the county office to demand answers. The clerk, a young man in a faded polo shirt, typed my name into the system and frowned. "There's no active record under Hayes Ranch," he said. "Are you sure it wasn't sold?" "Sold?" I nearly laughed. to who he shrugged helplessly. It says here the land was annexed under Municipal Zoning Change 27B Maple Creek HOA. That's when I saw the line that made my blood freeze. Previous owner, null. They'd deleted me. I demanded to see the physical archives. The clerk said most records were boxed in a storage room unindexed. You can check, he offered, but it'll take days. Days turned into weeks. Every night I went through stacks of folders, dust thick enough to choke on. I found invoices, permits, blueprints, even HOA newsletters bragging about expanding our beloved community into newly acquired property. But the deed, the one my father signed in '74, was nowhere in sight. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. When I tried to walk onto my own land, she showed up with 2 security guards. Clipboard and hand-smug smile locked in place. "Sir," she said, pretending to be polite, "you're trespassing." I held up a copy of the deed I had scanned years ago. "This says otherwise." She looked at it like it was a napkin. "That's cute, but unless your name's in our database, this isn't your property anymore. Maple Creek HOA now maintains this area." "Maintains," I snapped. "You built an entire neighborhood over it," Karen smiled sweetly. "Yes. Isn't it lovely?" She turned to walk away, then paused and said something I'll never forget. "You had your chance to be part of progress, Mr. Hayes. Don't stand in the way of people who actually care about community." Progress. That word stung more than anything. That night I sat in my truck at the edge of the development, headlights off, staring at the rows of identical roofs. Every window glowed with warm light, every porch had the same artificial plants, the same polished fences. They'd replaced authenticity with uniformity. My father's wild, stubborn land turned into a Stepford suburb. I wasn't angry anymore. I was determined. I knew somewhere buried under bureaucracy and arrogance there had to be proof. Something that tied that dirt back to me. Something that could tear down everything Karen had built on lies. I made a promise to my father that night, whispering to the dark horizon where our cabin once stood, "I'm bringing it home, Dad. Every inch of it." Because no matter how many houses she built, no matter how many signs she posted, I knew one thing for certain. You can pave over history, but you can't bury the truth forever. If there was ever a person who could turn a neighborhood barbecue into a board meeting, it was Karen Blackwood. She wasn't just an HOA president. She was the self-appointed monarch of Maple Creek, and her crown was a laminated rulebook. You couldn't miss her bright red blazer, even in July pearl earrings that caught the sunlight, like warning signals, and that clipboard the symbol of her authority. She wielded it like a weapon, tapping it against car windows, porches, and sometimes people's patience. The moment I walked back onto my land, I became her new violation. I learned quickly that Maple Creek wasn't a community. It was a kingdom built on fear of fines. Residents whispered about her behind curtains but smiled at her in daylight. She fined one man because his mailbox leaned 2 degrees left. Another woman got a warning letter for having unapproved garden gnomes. Karen said she was protecting property values. In reality, she was protecting her ego. And that ego was about to meet something it couldn't: bully me. When I first confronted her in person, it wasn't at her office, it was at one of her infamous HOA meetings. Picture a church hall full of folding chairs, plastic cups of lemonade, and 30 homeowners too, scared to raise their hands. She stood in front like a preacher sermonizing about community unity and expanding Maple Creek's horizons. On the projector behind her was a slide titled, "Phase 3, Development Future Prosperity." I waited until she paused for applause. Then I stood. "Question," I said, loud enough for the microphone to crackle. "Whose land are you building on?" The crowd turned. Karen blinked. "Excuse me," I asked. I repeated, "Who owns the land you're building Phase 3 on?" She smiled, that politician's smile. "The Maple Creek HOA legally annexed the property last year." I held up a printed map from the county archives. Funny. Because according to Ironwood County, that land still belongs to one Raymond Hayes, my father. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's eyes narrowed, the smile faltering just for a heartbeat. Then she recovered. "Well, sir, I'm sure there's been a clerical mix-up. We've worked with county officials for years." I stepped closer. "Then you won't mind if I clarify it with them publicly." That was the first time I saw the crack in her armor. After that night, she made me public enemy number 1. I'd come home from errands to find HOA violation notices taped to my truck windshield, improper parking, unauthorized presence. One letter even said loitering on community grounds. Community grounds. My father's land. Karen also began her smear campaign. She called the local paper, feeding them quotes like, "Disgruntled man attempts to scam HOA and claims ownership of community property." Within days, neighbors were whispering that I was some kind of con artist trying to extort the HOA for money. But I wasn't the only one she had burned. One evening as I stood near the new cul-de-sac, a man approached me quietly. He looked exhausted, shirt untucked, dark circles under his eyes. "You're the guy she's after, right?" he asked. "Guess that's me." He introduced himself as Tom Rivera, one of the first homeowners in Maple Creek. "I moved here 3 years ago," he said. "She's been running this place like a dictatorship ever since." "You're not crazy, she's got everyone terrified." Tom explained how Karen had pushed through the expansion using shady loopholes. She'd promised residents that adding more homes would lower their dues and raise property value. In reality, it raised her influence. The bigger the HOA, the more power she wielded. "She's got friends and zoning friends in real estate," Tom said. "If she said your house was purple, the county would call it purple. Doesn't matter if it's white." We exchanged numbers, and I started gathering everything: emails, meeting minutes, photos of the land before development. Every piece of paper was a nail in her coffin. Still, Karen played her part perfectly in public. She smiled for cameras, hosted charity drives, and appeared in the local newspaper with the mayor. But beneath that flawless exterior, she was nervous. I could see it in the way she started locking her office door during meetings and keeping her car parked close to the exit. I decided to dig deeper. I requested copies of her annexation agreements from the county office. What I received made my hands shake, not from fear but disbelief. The annexation request listed abandoned property acquisition, section 42 through 89. Attached was a fake signature labeled Raymond H. It wasn't my father's handwriting. Not even close. They'd forged his signature on a document claiming he had willingly ceded the land to the HOA years before he died. That was fraud. Pure and simple. I confronted Karen again, this time outside the HOA clubhouse. She was directing gardeners when I pulled up holding the papers. "You forged my father's name," I said flatly. She laughed too loudly. "Oh, don't be ridiculous." I handed her the document. "You see that H? My dad's signature never looped like that. He broke his hand in '85. It never healed straight." Her smile twitched. "Mr. Hayes, I suggest you take this up with the county." "I already did," I said, "and they confirmed it was filed from your office." For the first time, she was silent, just stood there clutching her clipboard like a shield. Then she leaned in close and whispered, "You have no idea who you're messing with." I met her gaze. "Neither do you." That night, someone slashed my truck tires. My mailbox was torn out of the ground. A week later, I got a notice from the county claiming my property taxes were delinquent, even though I'd paid them online. Karen wasn't playing fair. But she'd underestimated one thing. I don't scare easy. I started building my case in silence. Every letter, every timestamp, every voicemail from her threatening to stay off HOA land, I uploaded them to a secure drive and made backups. If she wanted war, she was going to get one, but by the book. One afternoon, I walked into a local cafe and overheard 2 contractors talking about a sweet under-the-table job expanding Maple Creek's utilities without permits. I paid for their coffee, sat down, and let them talk. They admitted Karen had ordered construction on plots that weren't legally cleared yet, including mine. They didn't care, it paid well. When I asked if they'd be willing to talk to a lawyer, they hesitated. But a week later, one of them, an older foreman named Earl, showed up at my door. "Can't sleep knowing what we did," he muttered. "It ain't right. She told us it was county approved. It wasn't." He handed me a copy of the work order, Karen's signature, again, authorizing infrastructure expansion on abandoned lots. That document became Exhibit A. By now, Karen was spiraling. She started sending out community newsletters painting me as a disruptive outsider trying to tear apart Maple Creek. But residents were starting to see the cracks. Fines, increased dues rose, and the HOA's once perfect lawns were starting to look patchy. You can't maintain a kingdom when the peasants stop believing in the crown. One night Tom called me. "She's scared, Dante. She's talking about you in every meeting. Says you're suing her." I smiled. "Not yet, but soon." Because by then I'd already found what I was looking for, the smoking gun buried in the county archives. A box labeled Ironwood Ranch, 1974. Inside, my father's original deed, complete with embossed federal seal and coordinates, outlining every inch of land still under the Hayes name. As I held that paper under the flickering archive light, I felt something deep inside shift. Not rage, not vengeance, just clarity. Karen thought she could bury the past under 88 foundations of concrete. But I had just dug up the one thing she couldn't fight: the truth. I walked out of that building knowing the war was about to begin, and this time I wouldn't be playing defense, because Maple Creek wasn't hers anymore. It was mine, and soon the whole county would know it. The county archive didn't look like much, just an old brick building behind the courthouse with a faded sign that read, Records and Deeds Ironwood County. Inside it smelled like mildew and paper dust, the kind of place time forgot. The woman at the front desk, glasses hanging by a chain, gave me a half-interested look when I asked for physical records before 1980. Those are downstairs, she said, nodding toward a flickering light bulb above a basement door. But if you're looking for anything older than the digital system, good luck. We've been trying to organize that mess since before I was born. Perfect. Exactly where Karen wouldn't dare to go anywhere without Wi-Fi or air conditioning. I descended into the basement. Rows upon rows of boxes towered over me, some marked zoning, others property records, all in handwriting, so old it might have been written with a feather pen. For 3 days I combed through them. Every night my hands came out black with dust, my throat raw from breathing history. I found maps older than the Civil War tax ledgers that still listed livestock, even a file about a land dispute from 1891, but nothing that said Hayes Ranch. On the 4th day, as I sat on the concrete floor, surrounded by mountains of paper, I noticed something odd. A box shoved so deep into a corner, it was covered in cobwebs. Its label was barely legible, but I caught 3 words, Ironwood Ranch, 1974. I tore it open. Inside were brittle manila folders, faded photographs, and one thick document envelope tied with red string. My pulse kicked up. The envelope was labeled Original Deed Raymond Hayes, parcel number R48A, notarized. I untied it carefully, and there it was, my father's handwriting, elegant and bold, his signature under the county seal. The coordinates matched exactly with the area where Maple Creek now stood. The federal watermark glimmered faintly under the light. For a long moment I just stared at it. It felt like touching his ghost, the ink, the paper, all proof that what he built was real. My throat tightened. For years I'd let his land sit quiet, thinking that was enough. But maybe this was the fight he'd been saving for me all along. Then I noticed something else, tucked inside an old letter stapled to the deed. It was from the county surveyor, dated the 18th of May, 1974. It read, Mr. Hayes. The southern boundary markers were installed per your request. Records of these coordinates are retained under federal record. Section 92. Do not remove or alter. Respectfully, John E. Miller, County Surveyor. My eyes widened. John Miller. I'd seen that name before on one of the earliest HOA expansion permits. If he was still alive, he could confirm everything. I found him 2 towns over, retired, living in a small white house with peeling paint and a porch swing. He was in his late 80s, eyes sharp behind glasses, thick as magnifying lenses. You said your last name's Hayes, he asked when I introduced myself. You must be Ray's boy. I surveyed that land myself back when everything was still dirt roads and oak trees. He invited me in. I showed him the deed and his expression softened. They still haven't fixed that mess, huh? He muttered. What mess? I asked. He chuckled bitterly. Zoning office screwed up the parcel transfers back in the 90 seconds when they went digital. They called me about it once, said there were missing coordinates. I told them your father's land was still private property. Guess they didn't listen. He walked to an old filing cabinet, rummaged through drawers, and pulled out a rolled survey map yellowed with age. Here, he said, that's the original. Boundaries clear as day. Your dad had me mark the creek, the tree line, everything. Anyone who says that land was abandoned is lying. I felt like I was holding the Holy Grail. I asked him if he'd testify if it came to court. He smiled. Son, I've been waiting 40 years for someone to ask me that. With Miller on my side and the original deed in hand, I knew I had enough to bury Karen legally, but I also knew she wouldn't go down quietly. That evening, I went back to Maple Creek. Sunset bled across the cookie-cutter rooftops, golden light reflecting off manicured lawns. Kids laughed in the distance while sprinklers hissed rhythmically like white noise, as if the whole neighborhood was pretending nothing was wrong. Karen was outside again, clipboard in one hand, wine glass in the other, barking orders at a contractor. When she saw me walking toward her, she froze. Back again, Mr. Hayes, she said coolly. Always, I replied. I brought a friend the truth. I held up a copy of the deed. She didn't even look at it. Oh, please. Another printout from your imaginary files. This one's got an embossed federal seal. You can feel it, I said. Also, you might want to ask your attorney what happens when a forged annexation meets a notarized original. Her face went pale. I leaned closer. I met the surveyor who marked that land himself. He remembers every inch. He's ready to testify. Karen's hand trembled just slightly as she adjusted her sunglasses. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, I said softly. I document. I walked away before she could respond. Behind me, I heard the sound of her wineglass shattering on the pavement. The next week was chaos. Karen started calling emergency board meetings. Homeowners panicked, whispering in driveways, unsure whether their mortgages meant anything anymore. Rumors spread fast that the land might be reclaimed, that they might have to move, that lawsuits were coming. Some even started calling me the man who owns the HOA. The local newspaper got wind of it. A reporter showed up at my doorstep asking for an interview. I agreed on one condition. I wanted the truth printed exactly as it was, no sugarcoating. The headline that ran the following Sunday read, "Homeowner returns from abroad claims HOA built 88 houses on his land." The article went viral locally. Karen's smiling face appeared next to a quote denying everything. "These allegations are unfounded and malicious. Maple Creek HOA operates fully within the law." But the cracks were showing. County officials began reviewing permits. One by one, they found inconsistencies, missing signatures, falsified approvals, even duplicated parcel IDs. It wasn't just my land she'd overstepped on. It was several. I spent hours at my kitchen table organizing everything: the deed, the survey map, Miller's affidavit, the forged annexation papers, the HOA newsletters bragging about expanding our territory. Each document went into a folder labeled evidence. By the end of the week, that folder was 3 inches thick. I drove it straight to my attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Sarah Kim, who didn't blink when I told her the story. "So let me get this straight," she said. "The HOA built 88 homes on your land without legal transfer, then forged your father's signature to justify it." "Exactly," she smirked. "Good. That's fraud, zoning violation, and property theft rolled into one. I'll have the court summons ready in 48 hours. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Until the next morning, I woke up to a pounding on my door. It wasn't the sheriff, it was 2 HOA security officers holding a notice. "You've been issued a cease and desist," one said flatly. "You're prohibited from entering Maple Creek property pending investigation." I almost laughed. "You mean my property?" The man didn't even flinch. "Sir, please comply or we'll call the police." I took the paper, glanced at the fake letterhead, and shut the door in their faces. Let them play games. Because I was done playing nice. That afternoon, Sarah filed the lawsuit Hayes versus Juan, Maple Creek Homeowners Association, and Karen Blackwood. The official charge list was 6 pages long: fraud, trespass, illegal development, perjury, forgery, and defamation. Karen's kingdom was about to go on trial. When the news hit, the HOA message boards exploded. Some residents sided with me, others with Karen, but everyone knew something big was coming. The next HOA meeting was canceled for safety concerns. Karen stopped appearing in public without her lawyer, and as I stood at the edge of that picture-perfect neighborhood one evening watching porch lights flicker on like stars across a stolen sky, I whispered to myself, "Dad, we're almost there. They can build walls, but they can't erase roots." The first summons hit Karen like a storm. By the time the county clerk delivered it, half the neighborhood already knew. Maple Creek's queen bee dethroned by a piece of paper with my name on it. I thought she'd panic. Instead, she went nuclear. The next morning, I woke to the sound of trucks at the subdivision entrance, new gates, security cameras, HOA-branded signs reading "Private property trespassers will be prosecuted." She wasn't defending her land. She was fortifying mine. I stood there on the shoulder of the road watching workers bolt steel posts into soil my father once plowed. One guard tried to hand me a warning slip. I ignored him. "You realize you're trespassing right now," I said. "Every hole you dig is another felony." He blinked clearly, not briefed for sarcasm. Sir, we're just following orders." "Yeah," I muttered, "so were the guys at the Berlin Wall." Karen's SUV pulled up a few minutes later, black, spotless, with vanity plates that read, "Ho Queen." She stepped out like she was arriving at a movie premiere. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she called, sunglasses glinting. "I see you've met our new community security team." "Community," I said. "You mean the army you hired to defend stolen property?" Her smile didn't waver. "It's called maintaining order. Something you wouldn't understand." "Order," I repeated. "Is that what you call forgery now?" The guard shifted uneasily. Karen lowered her voice. "You might think you found something, but this community belongs to the people who live here, not to ghosts of the past." "Then you're about to be haunted," I said, turning away. That afternoon, I installed my own set of cameras, solar-powered, motion-triggered, live-streaming everything to a cloud account. I also posted large metal signs around the boundary: "Private property, owner Hayes parcel R48A, trespassers subject to prosecution." Within 24 hours, the signs mysteriously disappeared. I printed more. By the end of the week, I had signs on every corner. I even mounted a drone camera over the creek line, the invisible border between what used to be their subdivision and my inheritance. The footage caught everything: HOA contractors, trespassing homeowners, dumping yard waste onto my side, even Karen herself directing workers across the line. I uploaded each clip time-stamped and geotagged, evidence building one frame at a time. Still, Karen wasn't done. She sent letters through her lawyer accusing me of harassment and emotional distress. She even tried to get a restraining order claiming I was spying on residents. My attorney, Sarah Kim, laughed so hard she nearly dropped her coffee. "She's panicking," Sarah said. "Let her dig. The deeper she goes, the better for us." But I wasn't laughing. This was my life soil being trampled every day. I started carrying my father's old revolver in the glove box, not because I wanted trouble, but because Karen's idea of intimidation was escalating. One night around midnight, headlights swept across my porch. I peeked through the blinds, two men in reflective vests moving along the property line pulling up stakes. When I stepped outside and shouted, they bolted. I found a small plastic marker with the HOA logo and the words Zone Expansion, Phase 4. She was still trying to claim more land even while under lawsuit. The next morning I confronted her during what she called a community beautification event. There she was, red blazer, perfect hair, handing out flyers like a benevolent dictator. Dozens of residents stood around planting flowers and painting curbs. "Morning, Karen," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. Her smile froze. "Mr. Hayes, this is a private event." "Private? On public roads you illegally built over my property lines." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One man whispered, "Wait, is that true?" Karen's face reddened. "Don't listen to him," she snapped. "He's under investigation for fraud." I pulled out my phone showing the deed and county map. "Actually, she's the one under investigation. You might want to check the news tomorrow." Someone from the crowd asked quietly, "Karen, is this why our HOA dues went up?" That's when she lost control. "Everything I do is for this community," she shouted. "Without me, this place would be nothing but weeds and weirdos." I smiled. "You're half right." The moment was electric. A few people clapped. Karen stormed off barking orders at her security. But it was too late. The curtain had been pulled back. Later that evening, Tom Rivera called me. "You made the evening news," he said. They ran the clip from someone's phone. Karen looked like she was about to combust. "Good," I said. "It's about time people saw who she really is." Within days, the HOA's internal group chat leaked. Screenshots flooded social media, Karen ranting about outsiders, plotting ways to control the narrative, even suggesting homeowners boycott anyone who spoke to me. Her words weren't just arrogant, they were evidence of harassment. Sarah filed an emergency motion to include the messages in our case. "This isn't just property theft anymore," she told me. "It's a full-blown conspiracy." Then came the sheriff. 2 deputies showed up at Karen's door with a court order she was to cease all development activities pending trial. The injunction froze every contractor, every project, every dollar of HOA spending. The community she'd built on lies was officially under lockdown. The next day I was driving by the subdivision when I saw her on the curb arguing with the deputies. She pointed at me as I passed. I rolled down the window. "Morning, ma'am," I said. "Need me to mow my lawn for you, too," her voice cracked as she screamed. "This is our community." I stopped the truck, stepped out slowly, and looked her dead in the eye. "Funny," I said, "because your community's sitting on my living room." Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, cameras recording. The moment went viral overnight. Hashtags spreading across local Facebook groups. Number HOA Karen, number Landback, number Maple Creek Meltdown. But beneath the laughter, I knew it wasn't over. A week later, Sarah called. "Trial date set, 2 weeks from Monday." Finally, the showdown I'd been waiting for. But Karen had one last card to play. That weekend, my drone footage captured something strange. Around midnight, several trucks entered the construction zone at the far end of the development, the part near the old creek bed. No permits, no lights, just silent machinery. When I zoomed in, my stomach turned. They were digging up the property stakes again, removing every trace of the legal boundary before the court date. I called the sheriff, but by the time a deputy arrived, the trucks were gone. All that remained were fresh tire marks and piles of disturbed soil. Karen had gone rogue. I spent the next day installing floodlights, extra cameras, even a small motion alarm. My land had become a battlefield, quiet by day, hunted by night. The tension was suffocating, but I couldn't show weakness. Not now. Then came the message. A plain white envelope taped to my door. No return address. Inside one sentence typed in bold, "You should have stayed overseas." No signature, but I didn't need one. Karen wasn't just fighting a lawsuit anymore. She was fighting to keep her empire alive. The following night, I sat in my truck with a thermos of coffee, watching the subdivision glow under streetlights. 88 homes, every one of them a monument to greed. And I swore to myself, you can't buy integrity and you can't bulldoze truth. Because in 10 days we'd both walk into a courtroom, and when the judge dropped the gavel, I intended to take back more than land. I was going to take back everything. The courthouse in Ironwood wasn't fancy, just a beige building with flickering fluorescent lights and coffee that tasted like wet cardboard. But that morning it might as well have been an arena. Every seat was filled. Neighbors, reporters, local officials, even county surveyors showed up to see if the legend of the man whose land was stolen by an HOA was true. As I walked in, the buzz died down. Cameras clicked. Karen was already seated at the defendant's table in a perfectly pressed navy suit, and that same defiant smirk she wore when she first called me a trespasser. Her lawyer, a polished man with hair slicked like a news anchor, whispered something to her, and she laughed. The arrogance in that laugh told me everything she still thought she could win. My attorney, Sarah Kim, leaned in. "Don't let her see you angry. She feeds on control. We've got the facts. We've got the deed. Let her drown in her own confidence." The judge entered, an older man with a calm, tired face, the kind that's seen decades of property feuds. Case number 5042 Hayes versus Maple Creek Homeowners Association and Karen Blackwood, he read. "Let's proceed." Karen's lawyer started first, standing like he was auditioning for a courtroom drama. "Your Honor, the plaintiff is attempting to seize property that has for over a decade functioned as a thriving residential community. He presents outdated, irrelevant paperwork and baseless accusations to disrupt lawful residents and the stability of our county's growth." He turned toward the gallery, voice booming. "Maple Creek is a model of order and progress. My client, Miss Blackwood, has dedicated her life to improving this community. The plaintiff's claims are not only false, they're malicious." Karen nodded solemnly as if she were being accused of witchcraft instead of fraud. Then it was Sarah's turn. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. She just opened a file and spoke calmly. "Your Honor, I have in my hand the original deed of Ironwood Ranch, signed and notarized in 1974 under federal jurisdiction, granting full ownership of the 48-acre parcel known as R48A to the late Raymond Hayes, the plaintiff's father. I also have certified county records confirming no transfer, sale, or annexation of this land ever occurred. Furthermore, I have physical evidence of forgery submitted by the defendants, specifically a falsified annexation request bearing a forged signature." She placed the documents on the judge's desk. The weight of history hit the courtroom like a silent bomb. Karen's lawyer stammered, "Objection. These so-called originals could have been." Sarah didn't even look up. "The deed was authenticated by the Federal Land Office 3 days ago. Verified signatures, watermarks, and coordinates. Your objection is noted and denied by fact." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Objection overruled." You could feel Karen's posture tighten. Sarah continued unfolding the survey map drawn by John Miller, the retired county surveyor who had come to testify. He walked with a cane, his old boots squeaking on the polished floor. "Mr. Miller," Sarah said, "you surveyed the original Hayes property in 1974. "I did, ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly but firm. "And I stand by every line on that map. Is it true the land that Maple Creek occupies today overlaps with the original Ironwood Ranch parcel?" He nodded. "Every inch of it. The HOA built those houses on Hayes soil. They never owned an acre of it." Karen's lawyer jumped up again. "Objection. He's relying on memory from 50 years ago," Miller smirked. "Memory, son. I still have the steel markers I put in that ground. You want me to show you where they are? I could walk there blindfolded." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge smiled. Sarah then pulled up drone footage on a monitor. This video shows Maple Creek's development overlaid with county parcel data. Every single structure sits on parcel R48A, belonging to my client. The HOA didn't just cross a line, they built 88 homes past it. The judge leaned forward. "And you verified this with the county GIS?" "Yes, Your Honor. With timestamps and location data certified by the county assessor's office." The screen froze on the image. Karen's pride and joy, Maple Creek highlighted in red, every house, a bright crimson mark of theft. Karen's lawyer began to sweat. He tried to regain footing. Even if that's true, the HOA acted in good faith under the belief the land was abandoned. Sarah turned to him sharply. "Then, explain this. She held up a printed email, the one from the contractors. This is a correspondence between Miss Blackwood and Harrington Properties. It includes instructions to proceed with construction despite missing ownership confirmation. Miss Blackwood wrote, quote, "If we wait for legal clearance, we'll lose the project. Just file the paperwork retroactively." The courtroom gasped. Karen's lawyer froze. Karen's face went white. Sarah let the silence linger before finishing, "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't good faith. It's greed with a clipboard." When it was Karen's turn to take the stand, she tried to regain her footing. Her tone softened, almost trembling. "I only wanted to help our town grow. I trusted the developers. I believed the land was neglected." Sarah approached her slowly. "Miss Blackwood, were you aware that Mr. Hayes had been paying taxes on that land until 3 years ago?" Karen hesitated. I don't recall." Sarah smiled faintly. "That's strange. Because I have here a notice from your office acknowledging his tax record dated the same month you filed for annexation." Karen's eyes darted to her lawyer, then to the judge. Her voice cracked. "That letter wasn't supposed to. I never." Sarah cut her off. "You knew. You knew he owned it. You forged a signature, built homes on his property, and bullied him into silence. Tell me, Miss Blackwood, how does it feel to build an empire on someone else's land?" The courtroom was dead, silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Karen stared straight ahead, hands trembling. "You don't understand what it takes to keep a community together," she whispered. "No," Sarah replied, "but I do understand what it means to destroy one." By the end of the day, the evidence was overwhelming. The judge called for recess before his verdict, but his expression said everything. Karen's lawyer avoided eye contact. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Hayes, how does it feel to fight your own HOA? Do you plan to rebuild Maple Creek? Did you expect this much support?" "I didn't say much, just one line. I'm not fighting an HOA. I'm fighting arrogance. And I'm doing it for my father." That night, I sat on my porch overlooking the quiet valley. The trial wasn't over yet. The verdict would come next week, but for the first time I felt the balance shifting. Sarah called around 10 p.m. "You did great today," she said. "The judge won't say it yet, but it's over for her. She's finished." But I wasn't celebrating. Something about Karen's face during recess lingered in my mind. The look wasn't just defeat, it was calculation. "She's planning something," I said quietly. Sarah paused. "What makes you think that?" "Because she didn't look broken," I replied. "She looked cornered, and cornered people do dangerous things." The next few nights were strangely calm. Too calm. The neighborhood lights flickered as usual, but the air felt heavier. Even the crickets went silent. Then one night around midnight, my phone buzzed motion alert. The cameras near the southern property line were picking up movement. I switched on the live feed and froze. Bulldozers. 4 of them crawling across the dirt, headlights slicing through the darkness. HOA trucks parked nearby. Workers digging near the stakes, the same ones John Miller said marked the original boundary. And in the center of it all stood Karen, flashlight in hand, shouting orders. I started the truck, grabbed my camera, and drove toward the glow. Gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up, headlights hitting her square in the face. She squinted, startled. "You're trespassing on HOA land," she yelled. "Wrong again," I said, raising my camera. "You're destroying evidence on mine." Her crew froze. "Keep digging," she screamed, desperate now. "We need to get this done before sunrise." Then came the sound that changed everything. A hiss, low and ominous. One of the workers shouted, "Gas line, gas line." Before anyone could react, a burst of flame shot into the night sky. The explosion shook the ground beneath us, a roar of fire and metal that lit the valley like daylight. I hit the dirt covering my head as debris rained down. When the noise faded, I looked up to see chaos trucks overturned, flames consuming the half-finished road, and Karen standing in shock, her hair singed, her clipboard melting in her hands. And that was the night the HOA's empire literally went up in flames. The explosion wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't just a boom, it was a roar that cracked through the valley, turning the night sky into a hellish orange. I remember the heat slamming into my face like a furnace door. The air itself seemed to tear apart. When I lifted my head, the world had become a nightmare. The bulldozers Karen brought in were overturned, one of them burning its tires, melting into black rivers of rubber. A wall of fire danced along the creek line, my boundary line. People were running in every direction, shouting names, dragging hoses that didn't reach far enough. And in the middle of it all was Karen Blackwood, standing there like the ghost of her own empire. Her red blazer was half burned, her hair tangled, her clipboard lying in a puddle beside her, edges curling from the heat. She looked around, stunned, whispering, "No, No, this can't be happening. Oh, but it was. I stood up slowly, camera still rolling, recording everything, the wreckage, the fire, the faces of the HOA board members who'd come to help. They weren't helping anyone. They were trying to shovel dirt over the evidence, literally. You did this, Karen screamed at me, pointing through the smoke. You sabotaged the worksite. I stared at her through the flames. Lady, you brought heavy machinery to dig up a gas line without a permit. You did this to yourself. I was trying to fix it. She shrieked, her voice breaking. By burning down your own neighborhood, I shouted back. Sirens wailed in the distance, sheriff's units, fire trucks, ambulances, a whole army of flashing red lights flooding down Maple Creek Drive. For a moment, all I could do was watch. The fire reflected in Karen's eyes like judgment itself. Deputies pulled up beside me shouting orders. I told them everything, the video, the forged, permits, the midnight excavation. One of them, Sergeant Morales, knew me from the earlier reports. He saw my camera and nodded. Good work, Hayes. We're gonna need that footage. By the time the fire department got control, it was past 3 a.m. The eastern section of Maple Creek was gone, 6 homes damaged, 2 completely leveled. By sheer miracle, no one was killed. But the gas company confirmed it within hours. The rupture had come from unauthorized digging. And the authorization form, signed K. Blackwood. When the sun rose, the neighborhood was a war zone. Smoke hung over the cul-de-sacs like a fog of shame. Reporters swarmed the barricades, shouting questions. Karen was sitting on the curb, wrapped in a gray blanket, mascara streaked down her face. Her phone buzzed non-stop in her lap, developers, lawyers, board members, everyone abandoning ship. One microphone pushed near her face. Miss Blackwood, did you authorize the construction that led to the explosion? She looked up, dazed. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. That line would run on every local news channel for the next 48 hours. While she was still being questioned, I was at the sheriff's office handing over evidence, videos, documents, emails. My camera footage clearly showed her directing the dig crew, yelling at them to move the markers. It was all time-stamped, clean, and undeniable. Sheriff Collins himself walked into the room after reviewing the footage. He took off his hat, sighed, and said, "Well, Mr. Hayes, I think this just became the easiest case in Ironwood history." Karen was arrested that afternoon. Charges reckless endangerment, property destruction, fraud, and falsifying public documents. When they led her away in handcuffs, neighbors gathered outside the subdivision entrance. Some clapped, others just stared. A few of her loyal board members tried to shout about misunderstandings and media bias, but the crowd wasn't buying it. The queen had fallen, and no one wanted to be seen bowing. I didn't celebrate. I just stood near the yellow tape watching her being loaded into the sheriff's car. She looked at me through the window, eyes hollow, voice muffled by the glass. "You think you've won, don't you?" I said nothing. Because the truth was, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like ashes, the same ashes, still drifting down from the burned homes around us. Over the next few days, investigators tore through HOA records. What they found was even worse than anyone expected. Karen had embezzled HOA funds, tens of thousands of dollars labeled as beautification projects. She'd used them to pay contractors under the table for expansions that never should have happened. There were emails to the developers promising backdated approvals, and even one message that said, "Don't worry about the county, they owe me favors." The county didn't owe her anything now. They froze every account tied to Maple Creek HOA and suspended all development permits. Homeowners were furious. Some tried to sue her, others tried to sell and run, but their properties were legally sitting on my land. They couldn't even get clear titles until the court sorted everything out. For once, everyone realized that the woman who claimed to protect property values had just turned their dream homes into financial disasters. Sarah called me from her office a few days later. "We've got confirmation," she said. "The judge wants to reconvene early. The explosion changed everything. He's moving straight to verdict." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. "So it's finally over." "Almost," she said. "But be ready. The defense will probably try one last stunt, something about negligence, maybe attempt to blame the gas company." "Let them try," I said. "I've got footage, every second." The courthouse that week was packed again. Karen looked different, no more suits, no jewelry, just a gray jumpsuit and handcuffs. Her lawyer was gone. He dropped her after the charges hit. She represented herself this time, which was as painful to watch as it sounds. She stood up trembling and said, "Your Honor, I only did what I thought was best for this community. Everything I built was for them, for their families. Mr. Hayes is destroying that, destroying us," the judge, stone-faced, replied. "Miss Blackwood, you destroyed it yourself, and you almost destroyed lives doing it." Sarah handed over the final exhibits: drone footage, the original deed, Miller's testimony, and the police report linking Karen's order to the explosion. When the judge read the verdict, the room went silent. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Dante Hayes. All land associated with Parcel R48A shall be restored to its rightful owner. The Maple Creek Homeowners Association's charter is hereby nullified. Furthermore, the defendant, Miss Karen Blackwood, is found guilty of fraud and reckless endangerment. Karen's knees buckled. 2 deputies caught her as she whispered, "No, no, this can't be real." It was very real. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. I just turned to Sarah, who gave a single nod. The courtroom erupted behind us, reporters firing questions, cameras flashing, but I tuned it all out. The weight that had crushed me for years finally lifted, but all it left behind was silence. Later that evening, I drove back to what used to be Maple Creek. The smell of burned plastic still lingered. Charred mailboxes, half-collapsed fences, the ruins of houses built on lies. I parked where my father's barn once stood and watched the sunset. The light fell exactly where his porch used to be, like the land remembered him. For the first time in a long while, it felt like it remembered me too. Karen's downfall hit national headlines the next morning. HOA president arrested after explosion, exposes land fraud scheme. The article mentioned my name, once buried near the end. I liked it that way, because this story was never about fame, it was about justice. And as I stood on that land, listening to the crackle of dying embers and the distant hum of a world finally moving on, I realized something powerful. Karen didn't just build 88 houses on stolen ground. She built her own downfall brick by brick, lie by lie, and the land had finally reclaimed what was always its own. The verdict changed everything. The day after Karen's conviction, I stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters, shouting my name, microphones thrust toward my face. "Mr. Hayes, what will you do with the land now? Are you going to evict all the homeowners? Do you have any comment for Miss Blackwood?" I didn't answer. I just looked past the crowd to the horizon, to the line of hills where Ironwood Ranch once stretched, untouched, before the concrete, before the HOA, before the chaos. Because while everyone else saw a scandal, I saw something else entirely, a second chance. The county returned the title to me officially within 48 hours. The clerk who had once said, "Are you sure it wasn't sold?" handed me the deed herself this time, framed, sealed, and signed by the court. The embossed stamp gleamed under the fluorescent light like justice carved in metal. "Welcome home, Mr. Hayes," she said softly. For the first time in years, those words meant something. The state ordered a full deconstruction of Maple Creek's illegal development. Bulldozers rolled in again, this time on my orders, but instead of chaos, it was cleansing. The 88 houses stood like hollow shells of greed, and one by one they came down. Walls cracked, glass shattered, the sound echoing through the valley like thunder reclaiming its voice. Neighbors watched from the edge of the site. Some cried. Others cursed Karen's name. A few came to me directly, pleading for mercy. "Please, Mr. Hayes, we didn't know," one woman said, clutching a child to her chest. "We just bought the house last year. We didn't mean to steal anything." I believed her. Most of them were victims, 2 pawns in Karen's empire of arrogance. So I did something that shocked everyone, including my lawyer. I told the county to spare 8 homes, 1 for each acre near the north end, far from the fire zone homes occupied by families who had nowhere else to go. I sold them the land legally for $1 each, with one condition: they had to help rebuild the rest as a community park, not a subdivision. The media loved the move, calling it the redemption of Ironwood. But for me, it wasn't about headlines. It was about restoring balance, something my father had always believed in. He used to say, "Land remembers who cares for it. It also remembers who hurts it." And Ironwood remembered. Over the next 6 months, the valley transformed. Bulldozed lots became wildflower fields. Asphalt roads were torn up and replaced by dirt paths that led to a central oak grove, the same spot where my father once built his barn. Local volunteers planted trees, built benches, and painted a wooden sign that read, "Ironwood Preserve, dedicated to Raymond Hayes, who knew the land always speaks." Every weekend, people came to help. Former homeowners, construction workers, even the sheriff's deputies who once guarded the property. They brought their kids, their dogs, their stories. The sound of hammers and laughter replaced the noise of arguments and lawsuits. One afternoon, Tom Rivera stopped by with his teenage son. He looked around, hands on his hips, smiling. "Didn't think I'd see this place without the HOA signs everywhere," he said. "Yeah," I replied, watching the wind ripple through the new grass. "Feels lighter, doesn't it?" He nodded. "Karen built walls. You built something better." It was strange, forgiving her even silently. For a long time, I'd imagined this ending with anger, maybe even revenge. But when I saw the charred ruins, the tears of innocent families, I realized revenge is cheap. Justice costs more, but it's worth every dime. Still, the ghost of Karen Blackwood lingered. Her name haunted the town for months. She was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, plus restitution fines she'd never be able to pay. The last I heard, she was working in the prison library organizing legal books for inmates who wanted to appeal their sentences. There's a certain irony in that. I saw her one last time by accident. It was at the courthouse when I signed off on the final demolition permit. She was being escorted down the hall, wrists in cuffs. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no fire left in her, no pride, just exhaustion. She stopped, voice, barely a whisper. "You could have built something great here, you know. We both could have." I held her gaze. "We did. You just built yours on lies." They led her away, and I never saw her again. Months passed. Ironwood grew quiet again, not the suffocating silence of abandonment, but the peaceful kind. The sound of cicadas at dusk, the rush of wind through the new trees. Sometimes I'd stand on the hill where the HOA sign used to be and watch kids play near the creek. It felt like the land was breathing again. And one evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I walked to the edge of the property where my father's old boundary stakes still stood. I'd left one there deliberately, not as a claim, but as a reminder. The wood was cracked, the paint faded, but the words carved into it were still visible. Hayes Ranch, 1974. I knelt beside it, brushed the dirt off, and whispered, "We did it, Dad. It's home again." The wind stirred gentle, almost like an answer. Later, the town council approached me with a proposal to turn part of Ironwood Preserve into a public education center for environmental conservation. I agreed on one condition. It had to be open to everyone. No gates, no membership fees, no committees, no HOAs. They laughed, but they agreed. The ribbon-cutting ceremony happened on a spring morning, the sky clear and bright. The sheriff spoke, the mayor gave a long speech about resilience, and then they handed me the scissors. Cameras clicked as I cut the ribbon, but all I could think about was my father's voice saying, "Don't ever let anyone tell you what your land is worth. Only you know that." And I did. Ironwood wasn't worth millions in real estate, it was worth something far rarer: peace. Even now, every time I walk past the oak grove and see families picnicking where Karen once ordered bulldozers to dig, I feel a strange sense of closure. The land is alive again, and so am I. Before I leave each evening, I stop by the small plaque near the creek that volunteers built without telling me. It reads, "In memory of those who tried to take and those who learned to give back." I smile every time I see it. Because in the end, that's what this story became, not a tale of revenge, but a lesson about respect, patience, and truth, the kind of truth that doesn't scream or demand attention. It just waits quietly, knowing it will outlast every lie. If there's one thing I learned from this whole ordeal, it's that power without integrity always collapses. It might take months, years, even decades, but sooner or later the truth always finds its way to daylight. Karen thought power came from control, from rules, fences, fines, and fear. But real power comes from patience, from the quiet certainty of knowing you're standing on the side of what's right. My father used to tell me land doesn't belong to the loudest voiced son. It belongs to the one who listens. He was right. The land listened. It endured every lie, every shovel of stolen soil until it was finally heard again. So if you're watching this and someone's trying to bully you, an HOA, a boss, a neighbor, whoever it is, remember, you don't need to shout, you just need to stand your ground and let time do what it always does. Because truth, like land, may be buried for a while, but it never disappears. Watch until the end to see how every lie, no matter how deep, eventually digs its own grave. And if you believe in standing your ground, hit that subscribe button because more real HOA stories are on the way.